Hello and welcome. We're so excited you're joining us today as we dive into lesson 3 of the quarterly focusing on Mark. Today with me, I have my good friend John Lyons, Pastor Alexander Bolotnikov, and I'm Savannah Carlson. Pastor, today we really want to talk about this verse in Mark chapter 2, verse 27, where it says, Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." This is a really controversial Bible verse, and I think it's really easy to get maybe a little confused or wonder what Jesus meant there. Can you help us as we dive into that?
Yes, it is definitely a very, very important passage and very controversial in today's Christianity because, as the title of our lesson is Controversies. Well, I've dealt with, many debates with my good evangelical friends. And to prove that Jesus has done away with the Jewish Sabbath, they bring this specific passage. Sabbath not for man, Sabbath Sabbath for man, not man for Sabbath. So you don't have to teach me anymore that you have to observe the Sabbath day. That's wrong. I can do any day because my Jesus is the Lord of my Sabbath. I can do any day as a Sabbath day. Which is kind of a new trend, because when we look at generally Protestantism, what happened is among the Puritans of England, there were these Sabbatarian Puritans.
Okay. Tell us more about those.
Well, you think about the Sabbatarian Puritans as an Adventist, you think, what did they insist on?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were Puritans, so I imagine it was rather strict.
Yes, but when I say Sabbatarian, what do you think they were doing?
Strictly adhering to the Sabbath.
Yes, correct. The only difference is their Sabbath was Sunday.
Oh, Interesting.
I don't have to explain here that the word Sabbath does not necessarily mean in English Saturday. Am I right?
Correct.
Right.
And so you have this kind of brand even today. I can hear, the preachers who preach on the 10 Commandments, it's throughout, especially in the South. I forgot, was it Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, which recently adopted the 10 Commandments as the part of the, their constitution. I'm not sure how they worded it, but they put it in the court and stuff like this. Have you heard it?
It's news to me.
Yeah, same. I haven't.
Yeah, that's recently. I mean, this fight about 10 Commandments in the state courts, it's actually going on all the way back to, at least to my knowledge, to the 2000, because when I arrived in this country, there was this big fight, Alabama Supreme Court, and it was kind of, big on debates, and ACLU got involved, and they say this is oppression of other religion if you bring Judeo-Christian values.
Union of church and state.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so it's now back in Mississippi.
Interesting.
And I couldn't believe when Supreme Court back then voted to, and not voted, but ruled that Alabama court decision is against the Constitution. The Christians across the South demonstrated, demanding that there would be 10 Commandments.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But do you know what the problem is? Do you think Adventists were among them?
No.
Absolutely not.
What do you think the reason why?
obviously it's about the fourth commandment, which is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And the general Christian world believes that the specific Sabbath day is either Sunday or any day, whereas we believe the Sabbath is still the seventh day or Saturday.
Correct. So that's the key, because it says exactly as you, Savannah, mentioned. It wouldn't go specifically. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then the rest is omitted. And the main part is omitted, which tells which
in 6 days, and then the seventh day.
Right.
Yeah, so this is one train of the Protestants, and those Protestants are specifically, like the their heritage of Sabbatarian Puritans. What they're actually fighting is this, for them, the question of Sunday being a Sabbath is not even a debate. They all agree to that. It's to them, it's like by default. But what they're trying to do, they're trying to make the Sabbath pure. So they say you go to church, you don't do secular work. So everything which often we as an Adventist teach, they teach the same thing, but about the Sunday. And that's one part of the issue. But then you have another trend of evangelicals, and quite a few non-denominational evangelicals prefer this way, because non-denominational, they like to attract more people, and so their approach is kind of very flex. They didn't want to kind of disagreements and stuff like this. So to them, this is the key. Sabbath is for man, so we can do whatever we want with the Sabbath. And so this is where the controversy is all about. And so that's where the problem lies. This text is serious.
Right. And I think one thing that I've been learning as we've been doing these over the course of time is that it is unwise to take scriptures like this out of context, because the context that Jesus is speaking about this in really matters for us to really understand what he's saying. So can you help us understand the context in which Jesus is saying this and why he specifically stated this?
And to a larger extent, I could argue, well, the whole law is for man, could I not?
Yes, it's very important. Indeed, if you want a proof of this, we can even read this in Psalm chapter 19. It says here in verses from 8 and forward, chapter 19, all the way through 12.
The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are righteous altogether. They are more desirable than gold, yes, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them your servant is warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Yeah. Who can discern his errors? Acquit me of hidden faults.
Yep. So basically, you see, the law of the Lord is perfect and all these nice descriptions. And it says, it's kind of interesting that English translates it as warned, but it's also like guarded. So it is for man, and there is a reward in that. So there's so many different, but let's go back to the context, and we need to read a little bit the full story. And the story here starts with verse 23, and let's just do it through 28.
Sure. And it happened that he was passing through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples began to make their way along while picking the heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was hungry? when he was in need and he and his companions became hungry, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the priest and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priests, and he also gave it to those who were with him. Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath."
Yeah, so basically, let's answer the first question, which is in general way. What is Jesus's stand on, let's say, and be specific here, on a Jewish Sabbath? Because it's important here, because again, we have, as I mentioned, the Christian Sabbath, as the Puritans and other Protestants put it, which is basically the Sunday. And so when you discuss with that kind of ministers and adherers to this position, they'll point you out that Jesus nullified Jewish Sabbath. So let's take a look what's Jesus's attitude, and how do we know if Jesus first of all kept the Sabbath and which Sabbath he kept.
Okay.
I mean, we can look just at the prior chapter. Not only throughout the Gospels does he make a habit of visiting the synagogue on the Sabbath, but in chapter 1, he goes to the synagogue on at least 2 separate occasions in a single day.
That's correct. So he's a regular synagogue goer. I like Luke 4:16 also because, this is very specifically talking about Jesus himself, not just the fact that he went to the synagogue because Jews were there and he had to.
Sure. 4:16, you said?
Mm-hmm.
And he came up to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read.
Yeah, so what do you see? What stands for me here is that the Sabbath was for Jesus the custom. It was the custom. So that's how he was raised. It's interesting. Unlike Mark, the Gospel of Luke most likely was redacted by Luke, but originally created or dictated to Luke by Paul. Paul is going through the length describing Jesus' upbringing, childhood, as a Jewish boy and Jewish teenager. And so this is something, if we're saying, hey, like always, I have some people, like I had a friend who is a traditional Protestant, who said, prove me the Sabbath day, but don't use the Old Testament. I explain like this. I follow Jesus because Jesus, it was his custom to observe Jewish Sabbath. So whatever is good for Jesus is good for me.
Absolutely.
And so then the question is, what exactly is going on in Mark 2? And so take a look at how the Pharisees react to, to Jesus's and his disciples, behavior on a Sabbath day. Take a look at Mark 2:24.
The Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And that comes in line with just a few verses earlier. They're asking
why the disciples were not fasting.
Right. John's disciples versus Jesus' disciples. It seems like they continually target his disciples. Maybe they feel like they can't come at him directly.
But notice this. I'm glad you're bringing this in because when we talk about Jesus and disciples, Jesus is the rabbi. We have to always forget. We have to always remember. We have to always remember, not to forget, that he is the rabbi. So what does it mean? First and foremost, as we explained in the previous lessons, Jesus, rabbis in this, it's a backbone of their educational system. So you follow the rabbi. The rabbi is going to teach you, even to write and read, and then you study the Torah, study the scripture, and so forth, and then, you even obtain the profession, either a lawyer, which is what it is, lawyer,
or a notary.
Yeah, or notary, as we discussed, yeah. So basically, it's Jesus, by establishing his school, came in direct competition with other rabbis.
Now, is that to say that he was training up his disciples to be lawyers and notaries?
No, in fact, he wanted everybody to be rabbis, because go and make a disciple.
That makes sense.
That's the great gospel commission. But the problem is the competition. The competition. This is his school. This is our rabbi school. So these Pharisees, they had their rabbi, because there were two famous big, quote-unquote, universities or schools where these Pharisees would go, school of Shammai and school of Hillel. We know that from history. So that's why there is a debate.
But now he's drawing these massive crowds of people.
Yeah.
I can see why they'd be threatened.
Oh, yeah. That's simple jealousy. And the question is always not about whether the Jewish Sabbath needs to be kept, because it's not the question. It's by default. Nobody even knows about the first day of the week at this time. The question is how the Sabbath will be kept.
Right.
And speaking of that, Jesus' response to the Pharisees kind of baffles me, specifically in verse 25, where he asks, "Have you never read what David did?" If we look at that story of what David did, we see David tell Ahimelech a bald-faced lie. It's seemingly dishonest gain, and even so, even though he and his men have kept themselves from relations with women, which is one part of eating the consecrated bread, the other part is you have to be a priest, which David and his men are not priests. How is it that Jesus points to this as an example?
Yeah, this is the story in the 2 Samuel where David is actually running away from Saul. His life is threatened. He and his men haven't eaten, might be for quite some time, and anywhere they turn, they could be arrested. So they're really in a dire situation, especially in the desert. You lose your calorie pretty fast, So to understand what the argument of Jesus here is very important. So what Ahimelech, why he is there, it's the second question. Let's focus what Ahimelech is doing. So Ahimelech sees that they're really hungry. But in the sanctuary, he doesn't have anything except the showbread, which is the sign of a problem in society. People were not given to the Lord, that he has enough flour to produce this showbread and put it out, and that's all they are eating. It means and we don't have any record in the Bible about some economic disaster or drought. It means that spiritual situation during this period of Saul trying to grab on to his throne is difficult.
Yeah.
And that's where Jesus is pointing out.
I also noticed that when David shows up, Ahimelech comes to him trembling. He has reason to be afraid of a potential emissary of the king.
Yeah, that's the other problem. So it was very difficult. But to understand the full story, we need to read in Matthew how Jesus plays this, and it's Matthew 12, verses from 3 through 6.
But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he became hungry, he and his companions, how he entered the house of God, and they ate the consecrated bread which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath, but are innocent? But I say to you that something greater than the temple is here."
So, what Jesus cites here is the examples where, Sabbath isn't, certain actions do not violate the Sabbath. In fact, this is what he's talking in verse 5. According to the commandment in the book of Numbers, priests must bake the bread and place it in front of the Lord in the holy place on a table to demonstrate that God is the one who sustains the humanity with food. That's the symbol. And it's done on Sabbath, which is the memorial of creation.
And for anyone else, baking bread on the Sabbath is a no-no.
Of course, but this is a special sacred ritual. And nobody has any problem. So, in case of Jesus, they were hungry because the local village didn't offer them anything for Sabbath. They were probably outside of the friendly territory. In Bethany with Martha, Mary, Lazarus, they would have had a food. In Capernaum, which is known even today as the town of Jesus, there's no problem. But that particular place was hostile. They haven't provided them food, which was basically an overt rejection of Jesus as the rabbi. And so they had to go and fend for food. Of course, some people say Jesus nullifies the Sabbath. Well, nobody says by allowing this his disciples to pluck the grains. But Jesus then also does away with the commandment, "Thou shalt not steal." You can't just,
It's true. That grain belonged to someone.
Yeah, you can't just go to a farmer's field and you see nice corn, you want a corn and a cob. You see, oh, there are acres and acres of it. Let's just pluck a couple heads. No problem. Show it like this, especially with kids present.
Right.
A good example of ethics, especially in America.
Right. I think the thing that's kind of hitting me as we're talking in this passage is the Sabbath wasn't meant to be a burden. It was meant to be a time for us to connect with God and have a deeper relationship with him, to rest in him. And I think that that's still relevant today. But what does it mean for us today? In the context of our conversation, how do we do Sabbath?
Yeah. It is kind of not very easy sometimes to understand how do we apply the good principles of the Sabbath and go beyond just saying, oh, this is connection with God. But there are definitely, and the Pharisees, initially they were not like evil. It says in the It says in the commandment, "Thou shalt not do any work."
Right.
What's that supposed to mean?
Right. How do we apply that?
Yeah. How do we do this? What do we say? Going shopping on Sabbath. Is this going to even within the Adventist circles? Like, would you go to the restaurant on Sabbath?
And
some people make exception.
I was going to say, there's a lot of people who would say no to that, and a lot of people that would say yes to that, and probably different answers around our table.
Yes, there's a debate.
Exactly.
Which is called the ethical debate. So how do we apply it? Well, this rabbinic document known as Mishnah, I have a part of it here, records Pharisaic tradition. The Pharisees, they went and basically used in Exodus 31, that describes, this whole part from 28 to 31 describes all the works that were done at the construction of the sanctuary, they basically outline 39 different type of works that are forbidden on Sabbath. So in the Mishnah, when they talk about this, one of the first thing they talk about is transferring object. Because in the book of Jeremiah, it says, do not carry the burden on Sabbath. Jeremiah was talking about loading and unloading caravans on Sabbath.
Right.
A true burden.
Yeah,
Right,
I
right.
mean, if you have a moving truck coming, you pulled your U-Haul to the new location, and you have your new apartment. Well, there's nothing in there, but it's Friday night. Would you start unloading it, or would you kind of hunker down somehow through Sabbath, go to your friends and wait until Sunday to unload, right?
Yeah. I mean, based on the Mishnah, if I said
Yeah.
that right, you don't unload anything. You
Yeah.
got to come up with some other option.
Based on, like unloading the U-Haul truck, it's even obvious based on the Bible without Mishnah.
Yes. I guess they would say you're not even allowed to drive the moving truck, right? Because
yeah.
you're moving things.
Well, what back then they said is like this. They went to such a minute details. Like, for example, the first example they described. So here is a poor person, and you have a Sabbath. You're sitting in your home, and he comes and knocks on your door asking for bread. So if you let him in and gave him the bread, you're good. But if you get out with your hand and hand him a bread and he is standing outside, you're violating the Sabbath because you already transferring the objects
Out of one building into another location.
yeah, exactly. They got into such a minutia, and you know what the problem was with grains? They were walking and plucking them. So they were, the law says clearly, you can take from the edge of the field if you're poor. So that they didn't violate anything. They didn't steal anything back then.
Right.
They were not harvesting it.
Right.
But the question is, they plucked the grain, they ate, and continued walking. You're not supposed to do this. You see minutia?
Yeah.
It's the same thing in John when the paralytic at Bethesda
He carries his mat as Jesus
take
commanded.
her mat. You see?
Yeah.
And all these rules.
This ratty old thing is not a burden.
Yeah. All these rules are designed to prevent greater things.
Right.
So it's kind of like this. But these rules are designed by rabbis.
And I noticed that you even see it in the number 39. They often take what is the law and then they step back from it, right? Like 39 lashes so they would never accidentally go over 40, which
Well,
was the actual limit.
This is kind of calling the fence. Jesus is not against it. Like, thou shalt not commit adultery. Don't even look with lust.
Right.
But Jesus, as the rabbi, has different priorities.
Right.
The sexual purity for Jesus as the rabbi is more important than carrying a piece of bread outside of your house.
Right.
To prevent, both of
Right.
these are designed to prevent,
Right.
but Jesus sees that as a priority compared to the rabbis of the Pharisees.
Right.
So when Jesus says someone is bigger than a temple, he's referring to whom?
Himself, I assume.
As God,
Yeah.
who is a lawgiver. And that's why what he says next, I am the Lord of the Sabbath, means I am the one who has authority to guide you how to properly observe the Sabbath, and my authority is greater than any human authority.
Yeah.
As Emmanuel, God with you.
Yes.
Right.
So we need to look at Jesus and his examples in how we plan our time with God on the Sabbath day.
Thank you so much, Pastor Sasha and John, for this wonderful discussion we've been having, and thank you for joining us. We'd like to invite you to like and subscribe to our channel so you can come back and do more of these amazing lesson studies with us. We hope you have a blessed day.